Billionaire goes undercover as a homeless father of twins. The poor nurse is the only one to help him. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Sarah Johnson carefully arranged the small wooden table in her South End apartment, smoothing the second-hand tablecloth she'd purchased specifically for tonight. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the mismatched plates, the nicest ones she owned, in perfect alignment. The February rain lashed against the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere that belied her churning anxiety. She paused, instinctively touching her still flat stomach. After 3 pregnancy tests and a doctor's confirmation yesterday, the reality was slowly sinking in. A baby. Their baby. Her mind drifted back to their first meeting 6 months ago. The Massachusetts General Hospital charity gala had been awash with Boston's elite, and Sarah, wearing her only formal dress, had been serving drinks as a volunteer. Harold Whitaker had approached the bar, his custom-tailored suit worth more than her monthly rent. When he'd asked for her number instead of another scotch, she'd nearly dropped her tray. The sound of keys in the door snapped her back to the present. Sarah quickly lit the candles and smoothed her dress. Harold entered, rain droplets glistening on his camel hair coat. He barely looked up as he checked messages on his phone, offering her a distracted kiss on the cheek. "Something smells good," he murmured, still scrolling through emails. "I made your favorite," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "The coq au vin you liked from that bistro in Cambridge. I tried to recreate it." Harold finally pocketed his phone and glanced around the apartment, taking in the candles and carefully set table. "What's the occasion? Did I forget something?" "No, nothing like that." Sarah busied herself serving the food, buying precious seconds. "I just thought we should have a nice dinner. Together." They ate in relative silence, Harold complimenting the food while Sarah barely touched hers. He sipped expensive wine from his own bottle. He'd started bringing his own after trying her grocery store swill once, while she nursed a glass of water. As she served dessert, a simple chocolate mousse that had taken 3 attempts to get right, Sarah's hands trembled visibly. "Harold, there's something I need to tell you." He looked up, his blue eyes curious but distracted. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the rain seemed to pause. Harold's face froze, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "You're what?" he finally asked, his voice unnaturally calm. "Pregnant. About 8 weeks." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "I know it's unexpected, but I thought—" "You thought what, exactly?" Harold placed his fork down with deliberate precision. "I thought we'd figure it out together, that maybe this would be a good thing for us." Sarah reached across the table, but Harold withdrew his hand. "I know it's a surprise, but—" "A surprise?" Harold ran his fingers through his perfectly styled hair. "You're joking, right? A baby? This was never in the plans, Sarah." "I didn't plan it either," she said, her voice trembling. "But I thought we might build something together." Harold's laugh was brittle, devoid of warmth. "Build something? With you?" He gestured around her modest apartment. "Sarah, you're a nurse from South End. My family controls half the commercial real estate in Boston. Our worlds were never meant to intersect permanently." Each word landed like a physical blow. Sarah felt the air being squeezed from her lungs. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Harold's face hardened. "I'm saying you need to be realistic. This was fun, but it was never going to last. You were never going to be introduced to my family, to my world. Because I'm not good enough? Because I'm black? Because I'm not wealthy?" Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "Because you're not suitable," Harold replied coldly. "My father warned me about this, about getting involved with someone so different. He called you a temporary error in judgment. I should have listened." Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I thought you were different," I thought what we had was real." "It was real enough for what it was," Harold said, standing abruptly. He reached for his wallet and pulled out 3 $100 bills, tossing them onto the table between them. "Handle this, or don't. But understand that a woman like you will never raise a Whitaker. That child would be a stain on our family legacy." The words sliced through her last defenses. Sarah slid from her chair to her knees, pride abandoned. "Harold, please. I'm not asking anything for myself, but this baby deserves to know their father." He looked down at her, something like pity flashing across his features before hardening again. "Forget you ever met me and move on with your life," he said, buttoning his coat. "That's the kindest thing I can offer you." The door slammed behind him with finality, leaving Sarah alone on the cold floor, arms wrapped protectively around her midsection as if she could shield her unborn child from the cruelty of their father's rejection. For several minutes, she remained frozen in that position, the candles flickering as the rain resumed its assault on the windows. Finally, she rose on unsteady legs and approached the table. She stared at the money, $300, as if that could solve everything, before picking up the bills with trembling fingers. Slowly, deliberately, she tore each one into tiny pieces, letting the fragments fall like confetti onto her carefully prepared dinner. In the small bathroom, Sarah splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. Next to the sink sat a framed photo from their trip to Cape Cod. Harold's arm around her, both smiling into the camera. She turned it face down with a decisive movement. That night, lying on her worn sofa as rain battered the windows, Sarah couldn't possibly imagine that in 15 years she would be commanding a billion-dollar empire, while the Whitaker dynasty crumbled under the weight of its own failings. The rain continued to fall as Sarah stared out her apartment window, watching the lights of Boston blur through the rivulets of water. 3 weeks had passed since that devastating dinner, and her morning sickness had begun in earnest, a daily reminder of her new reality. She placed her hand protectively over her stomach, wondering how something so small could simultaneously represent both heartbreak and hope. The following morning, Sarah arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital for her shift, the familiar antiseptic smell greeting her as she changed into her scrubs. She had worked here for 4 years, built relationships with colleagues and patients alike. It had always been her sanctuary, until now. "Sarah, can you come to my office when you have a moment?" Nurse manager Patricia Wilson's voice held an uncharacteristic formality that made Sarah's stomach clench with anxiety. An hour later, seated across from Patricia in the sterile administrative office, Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her. "We've received some concerns about your current situation," Patricia said, not quite meeting Sarah's eyes. "My situation?" Sarah repeated, though she knew exactly what this was about. "Your pregnancy." Patricia fidgeted with a pen. "Several patients have commented, and Dr. Whitman mentioned that it might create an uncomfortable environment given your unmarried status." Heat flooded Sarah's face. "My personal life doesn't affect my work performance." "Of course not," Patricia rushed to say. "But the hospital has certain standards of propriety. Human Resources suggests you might consider taking an extended unpaid leave. For your health, of course." Sarah's hands trembled as she walked out of the hospital 2 hours later, personal items in a small box badge surrendered. They had couched it in terms of mutual agreement and temporary arrangement, but the message was clear. A visibly pregnant, unmarried black woman was an embarrassment they preferred to hide away. The following weeks blurred together in a desperate search for employment. Sarah sat in the public library using their computers to submit job applications, ignoring the whispers of teenage girls who recognized her from the neighborhood. "Isn't that the nurse who got knocked up?" one whispered, not quietly enough. Sarah typed faster, updating yet another resume for a position she was overqualified for but increasingly desperate to secure. "We'll be in touch," said the clinic manager, eyes lingering on Sarah's now visible baby bump during her 5th interview in 2 weeks. They never called. The stack of bills on her kitchen table grew taller. Prenatal vitamins, doctor's appointments, rent now 2 weeks overdue. Her savings were nearly depleted. 3 months pregnant and unemployed, Sarah faced the terrifying reality that she might soon be homeless. It was during this lowest moment, after receiving a formal eviction warning, that Sarah made the decision she had sworn she would never make. She would go to the Whitakers. Beacon Hill loomed above the rest of Boston like an ivory tower, its federal-style mansions a stark contrast to her South End apartment building with its broken elevator and graffiti-covered entrance. Sarah had dressed in her one interview outfit, a navy blue dress that barely accommodated her growing stomach, and spent her last few dollars on bus fare. The Whitaker mansion stood behind wrought iron gates, a Georgian masterpiece of red brick and white columns. Sarah approached the intercom with shaking hands. "Can I help you?" The security guard's voice crackled through the speaker. "My name is Sarah Johnson. I need to speak with Harold Whitaker, please." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's an urgent personal matter." A long pause followed. "Wait there." 20 minutes passed, Sarah standing in the drizzling rain, before the security guard emerged from the gatehouse. "Mr. Whitaker doesn't take unscheduled visitors. You'll need to call his office." "Please," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I'm carrying his child. I just need 5 minutes." The guard's expression shifted from dismissive to uncomfortable. He spoke quietly into his radio, then gestured for Sarah to follow him to a small building adjacent to the main house. The guard's quarters, not the mansion itself. "Wait here." 10 minutes later, the door opened to reveal not Harold, but an older man with the same piercing blue eyes, Richard Whitaker, the family patriarch. He assessed Sarah with clinical detachment, as if she were a particularly uninteresting specimen in a laboratory. "Miss Johnson, I presume." Sarah nodded, gathering her courage. "I was hoping to speak with Harold." "My son is currently unavailable. He's in New York, finalizing his engagement to Elizabeth Sullivan." Richard delivered this information with calculated precision, watching it land like a physical blow. "Engagement?" Sarah whispered. "Indeed. The Sullivan family has been connected to ours for generations. The announcement will be in the Globe this Sunday." He straightened his already impeccable posture. "Now, regarding your situation, I understand you claim to be carrying a Whitaker heir." "I'm not claiming anything. I'm pregnant with Harold's child." Richard's expression never changed as he removed a checkbook from his jacket pocket. "The Whitaker family has a legacy to protect. My son is about to make an advantageous match that will benefit both our families. We cannot allow a misguided adventure to derail his future." He wrote with deliberate strokes, tore out the check, and placed it on the small table between them. Sarah saw the amount, $10,000, and felt sick. "This should adequately address any needs you might have," Richard continued. "In return, we expect your permanent silence and complete renunciation of any claim to the Whitaker name for your offspring." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she stared at the check. "I don't want your money. I wanted Harold to take responsibility for his child." "My dear," Richard replied with false compassion, "people like you will never understand people like us. There's a natural order to things. This check represents far more than you could provide for a child on your own. Be practical." With trembling fingers, Sarah picked up the check. For one fleeting moment, she considered the security it would provide, a stable place to live, food, medical care. Then, with a sudden clarity, she tore it into pieces, letting them fall onto the polished wooden floor. "I don't want your hush money," she said, finding strength in her defiance. "I wanted your son to acknowledge his responsibilities. I see now that was too much to expect from your family." Richard's mask of civility slipped momentarily, revealing cold fury beneath. "Security will show you out. Should you attempt to contact any member of the Whitaker family again, we will be forced to pursue legal measures. Sarah walked through the rain from Beacon Hill to South End, her shoes soaked through, her heart heavy but somehow lighter for having stood her ground. She placed her hand on her growing belly, a new resolve forming with each step. "We don't need them," she whispered to her unborn child. "We'll find our own way." Walking through the downpour from Beacon Hill to her apartment in South End, Sarah couldn't possibly imagine that 15 years later, executives and politicians would bow in her presence. In an office tower overlooking the Whitaker mansion, now a shadow of its former glory. 4 months into her pregnancy, Sarah stood at the register of Walgreens, scanning bottles of cough syrup and answering phones with one hand while the other unconsciously cradled her growing belly. Her feet throbbed in worn-out nursing shoes, the only comfortable footwear she owned, and exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. This was her second job of the day, having started at 6 that morning as a receptionist at a low-income clinic in Dorchester. "Price check on aisle 3, she announced over the intercom, suppressing a yawn. 5 more hours until she could go home, only to change into her third uniform of the day, a pale blue scrub set for her overnight elder care position. Sleep had become a luxury she could no longer afford. With her nursing career at Massachusetts General effectively over and her savings depleted, Sarah had cobbled together 3 part-time positions that barely covered her rent and medical expenses. None offered health insurance or maternity leave. At midnight, Sarah arrived at the modest brownstone of Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, an 82-year-old widow with early-stage Alzheimer's. The night shift was simultaneously the easiest and most difficult of her jobs, physically less demanding but requiring constant vigilance as Mrs. Whitman often wandered the house at unpredictable hours. "Who are you?" Mrs. Whitman asked when Sarah helped her back to bed after a 3 a.m. kitchen excursion. "I'm Sarah, your night nurse," she explained gently, as she did several times each shift. Mrs. Whitman squinted in the dim light, her gaze falling to Sarah's stomach. "You're having a baby." "Yes, ma'am." "Where's your husband?" Sarah swallowed hard. "I don't have one." The elderly woman reached out, patting Sarah's hand with surprising tenderness. "You're Rebecca, aren't you? My daughter. Don't worry, dear. Mother will take care of you and the baby." Sarah didn't correct her. Sometimes Mrs. Whitman's confusion offered more comfort than the truth. By the time Sarah returned to her apartment at 7 in the morning, she had been awake for nearly 24 hours. She collapsed onto her bed, too exhausted to change out of her uniform, setting her alarm for 10 a.m. when she would need to start the cycle again. The pattern continued for months. Clinic in the morning, pharmacy in the afternoon, elder care overnight. 4 hours of sleep became her maximum, often interrupted by the increasing discomfort of her advancing pregnancy. Sarah's doctor, at a community health center that accepted patients without insurance, expressed concern about her blood pressure and the dark circles under her eyes. "You need to rest more, doctor." Rivera insisted during her 7th-month checkup. "This level of exertion isn't healthy for you or the baby." "I don't have a choice," Sarah replied simply. That evening, as she organized medication for Mrs. Whitman, Sarah felt a strange heaviness in her chest. By midnight, a persistent cough had developed. She dismissed it as nothing serious, just another cold, one of many she'd worked through without pause. 3 days later, Sarah collapsed during her shift at the pharmacy. A customer found her slumped behind the counter, breathing rapid and shallow, her forehead burning with fever. The emergency room was blindingly bright after her momentary loss of consciousness. Sarah tried to sit up, panic rising as unfamiliar hands pressed her back onto the gurney. "Ma'am, you need to stay still," a young doctor instructed. "You're experiencing severe pneumonia and dehydration. Your baby is in distress." "I can't stay here," Sarah protested weakly. "I have to work. I can't afford—" "You can't afford not to stay," the doctor interrupted firmly. "This is life-threatening both for you and your baby." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of IV antibiotics, oxygen masks, and fetal monitoring. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, each waking moment bringing fresh waves of anxiety about her jobs, her rent, her future. On the third day, when her fever finally broke, a hospital social worker named Diane sat beside her bed. "Ms. Johnson, we need to discuss your situation," she began gently. "You're 7.5 months pregnant with severe pneumonia caused by exhaustion and a compromised immune system. You have no emergency contacts in your file. Is there anyone we can call for you?" Sarah shook her head, tears threatening. "There's no one." Diane nodded, unsurprised. "I understand you're working 3 jobs with no health insurance. Is that correct?" "I was," Sarah corrected, already calculating the likelihood that any of those positions would still be available after her absence. "I don't know if I'll have any when I leave here." "And your living situation?" "I have an apartment in South End. The rent's due next week." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "I won't be able to make it." "What about the baby's father? Is he in the picture?" The question reopened wounds that had never truly begun to heal. "Number. He made it very clear he wants nothing to do with us." Diane made notes on her clipboard, her expression neutral but kind. "For now, let's focus on getting you well. There are programs that can help with your situation. In the meantime, I'll be your primary contact during your stay." Sarah was discharged 2 weeks later, her pneumonia resolved but her situation more precarious than ever. As expected, all 3 of her jobs had been filled by others. Her landlord had posted an eviction notice on her door. The hospital bill, even after charity care adjustments, totaled more than $4,000. Diane had arranged temporary assistance, emergency housing vouchers, food stamps, and a connection to a maternal health program for low-income women. It was barely enough to survive, but it would keep Sarah and her unborn child off the streets until she delivered. The night she returned to her apartment, the reality of her situation struck with full force. She had 2 weeks to find a new place to live, no income, mounting debt, and a baby due in approximately 5 weeks. Sitting on her worn sofa, Sarah held her swollen belly while her son kicked vigorously beneath her palms. "We're in trouble, little one," she whispered, tears falling freely now that there was no one to witness her breakdown. "But we're going to make it, somehow." Hours later, with Marcus finally sleeping peacefully in her arms, the hospital social worker had helped arrange an emergency delivery when Sarah's water broke unexpectedly the day after discharge. Sarah made a vow that would define the rest of her life. "I will build an empire for you, my son," she promised, her voice quiet but resolute in the darkness of her small apartment. "One day, Harold Whitaker will look at us and realize his greatest mistake wasn't abandoning me. It was underestimating what we're capable of. We don't need his name. We'll create our own legacy." That night, kissing her newborn son's forehead, Sarah couldn't possibly know that her promise would become reality beyond her wildest dreams, or that the empire she would build would forever change the face of American medicine. 2 years had passed since that night when Sarah had made her promise to Marcus. The winter wind howled outside her small apartment as she gently placed her sleeping 2-year-old son on the neighbor's couch. Mrs. Rivera, a kind-hearted elderly woman from the floor below, had become Sarah's lifeline, watching Marcus during Sarah's night shifts in exchange for weekly grocery runs and help with Mrs. Rivera's medication management. "He's already asleep? That makes it easier," Mrs. Rivera whispered, adjusting her glasses as she looked down at the peaceful toddler. "I read him his favorite book twice." "That always works," Sarah replied, kissing Marcus's forehead before hurrying out the door. The hospital corridors of Boston City Medical Center were a familiar comfort to Sarah. After months of struggling with temporary positions, she had finally secured a stable nursing job on the night shift. The pay was less than what she'd earned at Massachusetts General, but they hadn't questioned her employment gap or her status as a single mother. Tonight, like most nights, the emergency department buzzed with activity. Sarah moved efficiently between patients, her practiced hands checking vitals, administering medications, and providing comfort. Shortly after midnight, the doors slid open, revealing a harried young woman with 3 small children. Please, my daughter's had this fever for 3 days, the woman explained, voice trembling as she held a listless 4-year-old. It just keeps getting worse. Sarah helped them to a triage room, noting the woman's exhaustion and the children's worn clothing. As she took the girl's temperature, 103 degrees, the mother spoke rapidly. I know I should have come sooner, but I couldn't miss work. I'm the only one they've got, and we just can't afford. She stopped, tears threatening. You're here now, Sarah reassured her, recognizing her own story in this woman's struggle. That's what matters. Later, after the girl had been diagnosed with a severe ear infection that had nearly progressed to meningitis, Sarah found the mother filling out insurance forms with visible anxiety. Do you have coverage? Sarah asked gently. The woman shook her head. My job doesn't offer benefits, and I make just enough that we don't qualify for state assistance. Sarah nodded, understanding too well. I'll have our financial counselor talk with you about the hospital's charity program. During her break, Sarah sat alone in the staff room, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside her as she sketched on a cafeteria napkin. Circles, arrows, and notes gradually formed a rudimentary flowchart. Patients connecting to providers through a digital interface, basic symptom assessment protocols, triage algorithms based on severity. What's that you're working on? Dr. Reynolds, an elderly attending physician, peered over her shoulder. Sarah started, embarrassed. Just an idea. Nothing really. Looks like a telemedicine system, he observed, taking a seat across from her. Sort of, Sarah admitted. I was thinking about that mother tonight. If she'd had a way to consult with a doctor earlier without missing work or dragging all her children to the ER. Telemedicine isn't new, Dr. Reynolds noted. But it's not accessible, Sarah countered, surprising herself with her conviction. Current systems cater to people with good insurance, stable internet, and computer literacy. What about everyone else? Dr. Reynolds studied her for a moment. That's a beautiful dream, Nurse Johnson, but you'd need millions to build something like that. His words, though not unkind, lingered with Sarah long after her shift ended. Back in her apartment, with Marcus still sleeping at Mrs. Rivera's, Sarah powered up the second-hand laptop she'd purchased through a payment plan. The screen flickered to life, revealing her night class assignment, a business model canvas for her entrepreneurship course at Boston Community College. Sarah had enrolled 6 months earlier, determined to advance her education despite the challenges. She was the only student who regularly brought a child to class, Marcus quietly coloring or napping on her lap while she took notes. Her professor, impressed by her work ethic, had encouraged her to pursue a business degree rather than the healthcare administration certificate she'd initially sought. You think differently, Professor Malik had told her. You see systems and solutions where others see only problems. Now, staring at the blank business model template, Sarah found herself transferring the rough sketches from her napkin onto the digital canvas. Hours passed as she researched existing telemedicine platforms, identified their limitations, and outlined her vision for something more inclusive, a system designed specifically for underserved communities. When Marcus returned from Mrs. Rivera's the next morning, Sarah was still working, her eyes red-rimmed but bright with purpose. "Mama work?" the toddler asked, climbing into her lap. "Yes, baby. Mama's building something important," she answered, letting him play with her stethoscope while she continued typing. Over the next few months, Sarah's idea evolved from a class project to an obsession. She taught herself basic coding through free online tutorials, working late into the night after Marcus fell asleep. She interviewed fellow nurses, patients, and community health workers about the barriers they faced. Each conversation refined her concept further. During a staff meeting at the hospital, Sarah cautiously presented her idea to a group of nurses and administrators, hoping for feedback. "It's ambitious," the nursing director commented when Sarah finished, "and necessary. But the startup costs alone would be prohibitive. Not to mention regulatory hurdles," added another nurse. "Healthcare technology is heavily controlled." Sarah absorbed their feedback without discouragement. That evening, in Professor Malik's office, she shared both her project and the responses it had received. "They're not wrong about the challenges," Professor Malik acknowledged, reviewing Sarah's business plan. "But they're missing the innovation here. Have you considered entering the MIT Healthcare Startup Competition? They're looking for exactly this kind of disruptive thinking." "MIT?" Sarah laughed incredulously. "I'm a night nurse with a half-finished community college degree and a brilliant concept that could transform healthcare access," Professor Malik countered, pulling up the competition website. "The prize is $300,000 in seed funding plus mentorship. Application deadline is next week." Sarah stared at the screen, the prestigious MIT logo seeming to mock her humble aspirations. The competition would attract Ivy League graduates, experienced entrepreneurs, and established healthcare professionals. What chance did she have? Yet as she read the criteria, innovation, social impact, feasibility, market potential, she recognized elements of her own project in each category. 2 days later, Sarah sat in a cyber cafe near her apartment, Marcus coloring quietly beside her as she completed the online application. When the confirmation email arrived, "Congratulations, Sarah Johnson. You have been selected to present your project." She stared at the screen in disbelief. That night, she danced around their small apartment with Marcus in her arms, his giggles filling the space as they twirled in celebration. "Mama happy?" he asked, his small hands patting her cheeks. "Yes, baby," Sarah answered, her heart full of cautious hope. "Mama's going to change the world." As Sarah prepared her presentation for the MIT competition, she couldn't possibly predict that within 5 years her name would be mentioned in Wall Street investors' meetings as the next great revolution in American healthcare. For 2 weeks, Sarah spent every spare moment preparing for the MIT competition. Between nursing shifts and caring for Marcus, she practiced her presentation in the bathroom mirror at 5 in the morning, her voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking her son. "Your posture needs work," Mrs. Rivera commented, watching Sarah rehearse in her small living room. "Stand straighter. You're not just a nurse anymore. You look like a CEO." Sarah smiled weakly, adjusting the navy blazer Mrs. Rivera had helped her find at a consignment shop. It was slightly too large in the shoulders, but the nicest piece of clothing she'd owned in years. "Is this really believable?" Sarah asked, turning to examine her reflection in the window glass. "Will they take me seriously?" "They will if you take yourself seriously," Mrs. Rivera replied with the confidence of her 80 years. Now again, from the beginning. The morning of the competition dawned bright and clear. Sarah dressed carefully, applied minimal makeup to hide the shadows beneath her eyes, and helped Marcus into his cleanest outfit, a button-down shirt and khaki pants from the children's resale store. "Remember what we talked about?" Sarah knelt before him as they waited for the bus. "This is a very important day for Mama. You need to be the quietest, best-behaved boy in the whole world." Marcus nodded solemnly, his blue eyes, so like his father's, wide with understanding beyond his 3 years. "I be quiet, Mama. I promise." The MIT campus sprawled before them, grand buildings of brick and glass intimidating in their academic prestige. Sarah clutched Marcus's hand tightly as they approached the auditorium where the competition would be held. Inside, the space buzzed with activity. Other competitors huddled with their teams, making last-minute adjustments to presentations on sleek laptops. Sarah noticed immediately that she was the only participant alone, and certainly the only one with a child. A young woman with a clipboard approached, smiling professionally until she noticed Marcus. "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have childcare facilities available." "He's with me," Sarah explained, her heart sinking. "He'll be perfectly quiet during the presentations." The woman hesitated, glancing between Sarah and Marcus. "That's not really our policy. The judges expect a professional environment." Sarah felt her opportunity slipping away. "Please, I don't have anyone to watch him. He has books and coloring materials. He won't make a sound." After a moment's consideration, the woman sighed. He'll need to remain completely silent. At the first disruption, you'll both need to leave. Understood? Relief flooded through Sarah. Completely, thank you. Finding a quiet corner, Sarah knelt before Marcus once more. Remember our practice? This is just like when you sit quietly during Mama's night classes. I know, Marcus whispered, already pulling out his coloring book. This is a important day. Sarah watched the first 3 presenters with increasing anxiety. Each had polished slides, complex data visualizations, and technical language that seemed designed to impress rather than communicate. One team of Harvard Business School graduates presented a blockchain solution for pharmaceutical supply chains, complete with animated graphics and projected revenue models. When the moderator announced, "Next presenter, Sarah Johnson, Johnson Health Access," Sarah felt her knees go weak. Setting her tablet on the podium, she glanced at Marcus, who gave her a small thumbs up from his seat in the front row. "My name is Sarah Johnson," she began, her voice initially unsteady. "I'm a registered nurse and a single mother." The silence that greeted this unconventional opening was deafening. Sarah saw several judges exchange glances, one raising an eyebrow skeptically. "For the past 7 years, I've worked in emergency departments across Boston, witnessing firsthand how our healthcare system fails those who need it most." Sarah tapped her tablet, bringing up a simple slide showing statistics on ER visits for non-emergency conditions. The mother who brings her child to the emergency room at midnight with an ear infection that could have been treated days earlier if she could have spoken to a doctor without missing work. The elderly man who comes in by ambulance with complications from uncontrolled diabetes because he couldn't get to his doctor's office across town. As Sarah continued, her nervousness melted away, replaced by the passion that had driven her to create this project. She explained her vision for a telemedicine platform specifically designed for underserved communities, with multilingual interfaces, low bandwidth options for areas with poor internet access, and integration with community health workers. "What about monetization?" interrupted one judge, a venture capitalist with a skeptical expression. "How do you make this financially sustainable while keeping it accessible to low-income populations?" The question Sarah had anticipated and prepared for extensively. She outlined her hybrid model: contracts with public health departments and Medicaid, a sliding-scale payment system, and partnerships with community health centers. "The beauty is in the cost savings," Sarah explained confidently. "Every non-emergency condition treated via telemedicine saves the healthcare system thousands in emergency room costs. Those savings can be partially captured to fund the platform's growth." By the time Sarah concluded her presentation, the energy in the room had shifted. The judges were leaning forward, engaged. Even the venture capitalist was nodding thoughtfully. As she stepped down from the podium, Marcus broke his perfect silence with a single enthusiastic declaration. "That's my mama?" The audience laughed warmly, and Sarah felt a blush creep up her cheeks as she returned to her seat, gathering Marcus into her arms with a whispered, "Thank you for being so good." The remaining presentations passed in a blur as Sarah's mind raced with critiques of her own performance. Had she spoken too quickly? Did her financial projections seem amateur compared to the Harvard team's elaborate models? When all 12 presentations were complete, the judges retreated to deliberate. Sarah took Marcus outside for fresh air, too nervous to make small talk with the other competitors who clustered in groups, confidently analyzing their performances. "Sarah Johnson?" A woman's voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah turned to find an Asian woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, hand extended. "I'm Rebecca Chen. I was on the judging panel." "Oh," Sarah fumbled, shifting Marcus to her hip to shake Rebecca's hand. "It's nice to meet you." "Your presentation was refreshingly substantive," Rebecca said, smiling at Marcus. "While others showed us elaborate animations of what might be possible someday, you showed us something necessary today. Before Sarah could respond, the announcement came for everyone to return to the auditorium for results. Heart-pounding, she took her seat, Marcus once again quietly coloring beside her. After careful consideration, the lead judge began. This year's MIT Healthcare Innovation Prize of $300,000 in seed funding goes to Sarah Johnson for Johnson Health Access. For several seconds, Sarah couldn't move, certain she had misheard. It was only when Marcus tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, they said your name," that she rose on shaking legs and made her way to the stage. As she accepted the ceremonial check, tears threatening to spill over, Sarah caught sight of Rebecca Chen nodding approvingly from the side of the stage. After the ceremony, as competitors and judges mingled at a small reception, Rebecca approached Sarah again. "You don't just have a product, Sarah. You have a revolution. With the right guidance, you could transform healthcare access in this country." While signing the papers for her small shared office space, Sarah couldn't possibly imagine that in just 7 years, Johnson Health Innovations would occupy 20 floors of a downtown Boston skyscraper, forever changing the landscape of American healthcare. Rebecca Chen's words echoed in Sarah's mind as she signed the lease for a tiny office in a co-working space in downtown Boston. The space was barely larger than a closet, just enough room for a desk, 2 chairs, and a small filing cabinet, but it represented something monumental: the official headquarters of Johnson Health Innovations. The following morning, Sarah arrived early, Marcus still sleepy-eyed beside her. She had explained to Mrs. Rivera that she couldn't afford childcare yet, and for the foreseeable future, her son would be accompanying her to work. "This is our company," Sarah told Marcus, setting up a small play area in the corner with books and quiet toys. "One day, it will help millions of people get the medical care they need." Marcus nodded solemnly, already accustomed to his mother's ambitious declarations. At 3.5, he had spent more time in classrooms, hospitals, and now offices than most children his age. Within the first month, Sarah hired 2 employees. Raj Patel, a brilliant programmer who had recently graduated from Northeastern and believed in the mission enough to accept equity instead of a competitive salary, and Diana Martinez, a community health worker who understood firsthand the barriers that prevented vulnerable populations from accessing healthcare. "Our app needs to be intuitive," Sarah explained during their first team meeting, sketching on the whiteboard they'd mounted on the wall. "No medical jargon, multiple languages, works on the oldest smartphones with minimal data." "And doctors?" Diana asked. "How do we convince them to participate?" "We start with the idealists," Sarah replied. "The ones who went into medicine to help people, not to maximize billing." Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. Sarah worked 18-hour days, coding alongside Raj until her eyes burned, then testing interfaces with Diana until midnight. Marcus became a fixture in the office, sleeping on a makeshift bed of cushions while Sarah worked through the night. His presence both her greatest motivation and her most pressing concern. "You need funding," Rebecca Chen advised during one of their monthly mentoring sessions. "The MIT money won't last forever." "We're not ready," Sarah protested. "The product isn't perfect yet." "It never will be," Rebecca replied. "But what you have might be good enough to convince the right investor." 6 months after founding the company, Sarah faced her first major setback. A demonstration for a potential angel investor failed spectacularly when the app crashed midway through. The investor, a tech veteran who had made his fortune in financial software, shook his head. "Nice concept, but you're out of your depth," he said, not unkindly. "This is healthcare. You can't afford bugs." Instead of retreating, Sarah opened her laptop right there and began diagnosing the problem. "It's the authentication protocol," she muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard. Within 20 minutes, she had identified and fixed the issue, then restarted the demonstration. The investor's eyebrows rose. Most founders would have apologized and scheduled another meeting. "I'm not most founders," Sarah replied. and people needing healthcare can't wait for another meeting. That tenacity secured their first additional investment, a modest $150,000 that allowed Sarah to hire 2 more developers and move to a slightly larger office. More importantly, it helped her refine the platform to the point where she could approach Boston Community Health Center with a pilot proposal. "We're not asking for payment," Sarah explained to the skeptical medical director. "We want to prove the value first. Give us 3 months. Let 10 of your providers use our platform for patients who can't make it to in-person appointments." "And what do you get out of this?" the director asked. "Data, feedback, real-world validation that could help us secure proper funding." The pilot launched in January. By April, the results were irrefutable. Emergency room visits for the participating patient population had decreased by 30%. Patient satisfaction scores had increased by 45%. Providers reported saving an average of 12 hours weekly in unnecessary in-person appointments. A small feature in the Boston Globe technology section brought the first hint of public recognition. Former nurses startup revolutionizes healthcare access for underserved communities. The article caught the attention of several venture capital firms, resulting in a series of meetings that tested Sarah's resolve in new ways. "Impressive metrics," said Jordan Blackwell, a partner at Meridian Ventures during their 3rd meeting. "But you need experienced leadership to scale this. We'd want to bring in a seasoned CEO." Sarah's grip tightened on her presentation folder. "Mr. Blackwell, look at what I've accomplished with $300,000 in seed funding. I built a working platform, secured a successful pilot, and demonstrated measurable impact on healthcare outcomes. Many startups with experienced CEOs and millions in funding haven't achieved that." "It's not personal, Ms. Johnson. It's business. Investors want certainty." "What's more certain than results?" Sarah countered. "I understand your concerns, but I'm not giving up control of my company. I'll consider an experienced COO or CTO, but I remain CEO." The negotiation extended for weeks, with Sarah consulting Rebecca before each round. "They'll try to edge you out eventually," Rebecca warned. "Be prepared to walk away if necessary." After countless late nights reviewing term sheets and projections, Sarah secured a deal. $5 million for 20% of the company, with Sarah maintaining her position as CEO and control of the board. The investors had 24 hours to accept. The morning the contracts were signed, Sarah wore the same navy blazer she'd worn to the MIT competition, now slightly faded and too tight across the shoulders. On paper, she was now a millionaire, though every dollar would go back into the company. That evening, Sarah and Marcus stood in the empty living room of their new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with good schools. No luxury features, no doorman, but it was clean, secure, and most importantly, theirs. "Is this our forever home?" Marcus asked, his voice echoing in the unfurnished space. Sarah knelt beside him, seeing in his blue eyes a future brighter than anything she could have imagined 3 years earlier. "It's our beginning," she answered. "The first place that's truly ours." As Sarah unpacked their few possessions in the new apartment, she couldn't possibly imagine that in just 4 years she would be inaugurating the corporate headquarters of Johnson Health Innovations, an entire building in Boston's financial district, or that a certain surname from her past would resurface when she least expected it. 4 years passed in a blur of growth and transformation. From that modest 2-bedroom apartment, Sarah had built Johnson Health Innovations into a formidable presence in the healthcare industry. The company now occupied 3 floors in a gleaming office building downtown, employed over 300 people, and was valued at $500 million. Their telemedicine platform served more than 2 million patients across 15 states, with expansion plans underway for nationwide coverage. Sarah Johnson, now 37, had herself transformed from the desperate single mother scraping by on multiple jobs to a recognized innovator frequently featured in business magazines and invited to speak at healthcare conferences. This morning, She sat in a makeup chair at the Boston NBC affiliate, preparing for a live segment on the morning show. 3 minutes, Ms. Johnson, the producer called, checking her clipboard. Sarah nodded, studying her reflection in the mirror. She wore a tailored burgundy suit, Armani purchased when she closed their last funding round. Her hair styled in a sophisticated bob, gold earrings catching the studio lights. Sometimes she still struggled to recognize herself in these moments. "Mom? Your talking points," Marcus said, handing her a neatly typed index card. At 10 years old, Marcus Johnson had grown into a remarkable child. His academic gifts had become impossible to ignore when, at age 6, his first-grade teacher had called Sarah in for an urgent conference. Marcus completed the entire semester's math curriculum in 2 weeks, the teacher had explained, both impressed and concerned. "He's bored and unchallenged. I've never seen anything like it." Testing confirmed what Sarah had long suspected. Marcus possessed extraordinary mathematical and analytical abilities. He now attended the Brookline Academy for Gifted Children, where even among exceptional students he stood out. "And we're live in 3, 2, 1, the floor director signaled. Joining us this morning is Sarah Johnson, founder and CEO of Johnson Health Innovations, whose telemedicine platform is changing how underserved communities access healthcare, the host began. "Sarah, your company started with just you and your son in a tiny office. Now you're valued at $500 million. What's your secret?" Sarah smiled, poised and confident. "There's no secret. Just the recognition that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. Our goal is to democratize access to quality healthcare, regardless of geography, income, or social status." Back at headquarters that afternoon, Sarah led the weekly executive meeting in their glass-walled conference room overlooking Boston Harbor. "The expansion to rural Mississippi is proceeding ahead of schedule," reported Diana Martinez, now Chief Community Officer. "Local healthcare workers are adopting the platform faster than projected. That's the 7th state where we've exceeded adoption targets," Sarah noted with satisfaction. James Chen, their Chief Technology Officer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We need to discuss the predictive health module. We've hit a significant roadblock." Sarah looked up from her tablet. "What kind of roadblock?" "The algorithm can't accurately predict which patients might develop complications from chronic conditions," James explained, frustration evident in his voice. "We've tried every approach our team can think of. Without this feature, we're just another telemedicine platform." "How long to solve it?" Sarah asked. "Honestly, months, maybe longer. We might need to partner with an AI specialist firm, which would be costly and time-consuming." The meeting continued, but the prediction problem weighed heavily on Sarah's mind. That evening, as she prepared dinner in their spacious penthouse apartment, a recent upgrade she'd finally allowed herself, she explained the challenge to Marcus. "It sounds like they're approaching it wrong," Marcus commented, setting the table with careful precision. "If you're trying to predict complications, you shouldn't just look at medical data. You should examine behavioral patterns, environmental factors, and social determinants." Sarah smiled at her son's advanced vocabulary. "That's actually a smart observation, but incredibly complex to program." "Not really," Marcus shrugged. "It's just multivariable pattern recognition with weighted nodes." Sarah nearly dropped the pasta spoon. "What did you just say?" "We covered neural networks in my computer science enrichment class last month," Marcus explained casually. "This sounds like a perfect application." At 3 o'clock Sunday morning, Sarah was awakened by Marcus shaking her shoulder. "Mom, I think I figured it out." Bleary-eyed, she followed her son to his bedroom where his computer screen displayed complex equations and flowcharts. "What am I looking at?" "The prediction algorithm," Marcus explained, excitement making his words tumble over each other. "I've been working on it since Friday. Can we go to your office? I need more computing power to test it." By noon on Sunday, Johnson Health Innovations headquarters buzzed with unexpected activity. Sarah had called in James and two senior developers who now watched in astonishment as Marcus explained his approach on the whiteboard. "The key is identifying non-obvious correlations," Marcus said, drawing another connection line. "Most algorithms look at direct relationships. Mine examines third and fourth order connections that humans wouldn't typically recognize." James stared at the board, then at the 10-year-old child explaining concepts that had stumped his team of experienced developers. "This is remarkable. But would it actually work? Let's find out," Sarah suggested. The first simulation using anonymized patient data ran at 3 that afternoon. By 5, the results were undeniable. Marcus's algorithm predicted complications with 87% accuracy, nearly double what the development team had achieved. "This isn't just good," James said quietly to Sarah as Marcus excitedly explained another feature to the developers. "This is revolutionary. It could be worth billions." The following morning, Sarah called an emergency meeting of the executive team. As James presented the breakthrough, murmurs of amazement circulated around the table. "This could transform preventive medicine," the chief medical officer noted. "We should patent it immediately." "About that," Sarah interjected. "The algorithm was developed by Marcus over the weekend." Silence fell across the room, followed by an uncomfortable exchange of glances. "Sarah," began the chief operating officer carefully, "while it's admirable that your son contributed ideas, we should register the intellectual property under the company name. He's a child. A child who solved a problem that stumped our entire development team," Sarah countered, her voice firm. "My son created this. The credit and the rights belong to him, non-negotiable." Later that week, Sarah sat with Marcus and the company's legal counsel explaining the concept of intellectual property in terms he could understand. "Your brain created something valuable that can help save lives," she told him. "These papers ensure you'll always be recognized as the inventor, and you'll benefit from it when you're older." The attorney cleared his throat. "We've established a trust fund for Marcus. The licensing fees from the algorithm will be deposited there until he turns 21. The formal announcement went out the following day. Johnson Health Innovations announces breakthrough predictive health technology. The Johnson Predictor algorithm, developed by Marcus Johnson, will be licensed exclusively to Johnson Health Innovations for integration into their telemedicine platform." That night, Sarah watched Marcus sleep, marveling at the extraordinary child she'd raised against all odds. "You are extraordinary," she whispered, brushing dark hair from his forehead, "and no one will ever diminish your value." While Sarah contemplated her son's brilliant future, she couldn't imagine that Marcus's revolutionary algorithm would attract not only the attention of technology and healthcare giants, but also resurrect ghosts from Boston's past that she believed were long buried. The gleaming glass facade of Johnson Health Innovations headquarters caught the morning sunlight, casting reflections across Boston's Seaport district. 15 stories of architectural brilliance topped with a helipad and solar panels, a physical manifestation of Sarah Johnson's meteoric rise. 5 years had transformed her startup into a healthcare technology giant valued at $4.2 billion with 3,000 employees across the country. Sarah stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had defied impossible odds. Her tailored Chanel suit, charcoal gray with subtle blue pinstripes, was a far cry from the faded blazer she'd worn to pitch competitions years ago. "The final numbers from the California expansion came in," announced Rebecca Chen, now Johnson Health Innovations chairwoman, walking in with a tablet. "We've exceeded projections by 22%. Sarah smiled. "That's 7 consecutive quarters above target. The board should be pleased. More than pleased. There's talk of an IPO next year." A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus entered, now 15 and nearly as tall as Sarah. The years had accentuated his resemblance to Harold. Those same penetrating blue eyes, the strong jawline beginning to emerge from childhood softness, but his character couldn't have been more different from his biological father. "Mom, I finished the interface for the neural network upgrade," he said, balancing his advanced laptop in one hand. "It improves diagnostic accuracy by another 12%. Sarah beamed with pride. Marcus had grown into his extraordinary intelligence with surprising humility. While legally too young to be an employee, he served as the company's innovation ambassador, his algorithms and insights driving much of their technological advantage. The trust established from his original algorithm now contained over $200 million, making him one of the wealthiest teenagers in America, though he remained largely uninterested in material wealth. "Perfect timing," Sarah replied. "We'll need this for the federal presentation next week." Her phone buzzed with a notification. Sarah glanced down to see an email from the Health and Human Services Secretary himself. The Johnson Health Innovations platform had been selected as the centerpiece of a groundbreaking federal initiative to expand telehealth services to rural and underserved communities across America. The contract, $1.5 billion over 5 years. "It's official," Sarah announced, showing them the screen. "We got the federal contract." Rebecca clasped her hands together. "This changes everything. We'll need to prepare a comprehensive rollout strategy. And we'll need to announce it properly," Sarah added. "The Future of Healthcare conference in New York next month would be perfect. They've already invited us to keynote." Marcus looked up from his laptop. "Both of us? They mentioned in their email that they wanted me to present the new prediction module." Sarah hesitated. Though Marcus had presented at smaller conferences, the Future of Healthcare event would put him in front of 5,000 industry leaders, government officials, and media representatives. Despite his brilliance, he was still a teenager who'd been largely sheltered from the spotlight. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Sarah asked gently. "It's a massive audience." Marcus closed his laptop with quiet confidence. "Mom, I was born ready. Besides, you'll be there with me." The weeks leading up to the conference passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah reviewed her keynote presentation late into the night, while Marcus fine-tuned his demonstration with the precision that had become his trademark. 200 miles away, in a considerably less impressive office, Harold Whitaker stared grimly at the quarterly financial reports for Whitaker Industries. At 49, Harold looked significantly older, stress lines creasing his once handsome face, gray liberally streaking his hair. The family company that had once dominated Boston's commercial real estate market had been hemorrhaging value for years, victims of Harold's poor investment decisions and the changing economic landscape. "Mr. Whitaker, the board is requesting an emergency meeting tomorrow," his assistant announced hesitantly from the doorway. "The Sullivan Group is threatening to pull their investment." Harold rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of another migraine. The Sullivan Group, his former in-laws from his second failed marriage, controlled 30% of Whitaker Industries' remaining assets. Their departure would likely trigger bankruptcy. "Get me everything you can on potential new investors," he instructed, reaching for his tumbler of bourbon. "And find me an invitation to the Future of Healthcare conference in New York next month. I heard Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson will be scouting investment opportunities there." His assistant nodded, placing a conference brochure on his desk before leaving. Harold flipped through it absently until a headline caught his eye. Keynote address: Sarah Johnson, CEO of Johnson Health Innovations, revolutionizing healthcare access in America. Something about the name and face in the accompanying photograph tugged at his memory, though he couldn't quite place her. The article mentioned the company's meteoric rise and its visionary leadership in healthcare technology. Harold studied the photo more carefully. Something about the woman's eyes seemed vaguely familiar. Johnson Health Innovations, he muttered to himself. Worth investigating. The morning of their departure to New York, Sarah and Marcus stood on the private helipad atop the Johnson Health Innovations building. Their company helicopter would take them to the airport where the corporate jet awaited. "Remember when we used to take the bus everywhere?" Sarah asked, watching the helicopters approach. Marcus smiled. "You always brought those little bags of pretzels and told me we were on an adventure." "We were. We still are." Hours later, they arrived at the Four Seasons in Manhattan, where staff rushed to assist with their luggage and check-in process. The general manager personally escorted them to the presidential suite. "Ms. Johnson, we're honored to have you with us," he said, opening the double doors to reveal an opulent space with panoramic views of Central Park. "If there's anything at all you need, my direct line is programmed into the suite phone." That evening, as Sarah stood by the window gazing at the Manhattan skyline, a brief memory flashed through her mind, herself sobbing on the floor of her tiny South End apartment, Harold's cruel words echoing in her ears. The contrast between that moment and her present reality was so stark it almost seemed like different lifetimes. "Mom?" Marcus called from the sitting area where he was reviewing his presentation. "Is everything okay?" Sarah turned, smiling at her son, her greatest achievement and deepest joy. "Everything is perfect." As she adjusted her elegant Chanel suit for the opening dinner of the conference, Sarah couldn't possibly imagine that in less than 24 hours, she would be face to face with the man who had tried to destroy her, in a confrontation that would shake the American corporate elite to its foundations. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel glittered with wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the assembled healthcare elite. Pharmaceutical executives in bespoke suits, hospital administrators discussing merger possibilities, venture capitalists scanning the room for the next billion-dollar opportunity. At the center of it all stood Sarah Johnson, a vision of poise in her crimson Armani gown, her diamond earrings catching the light as she laughed at something the governor of New York had just said. "Ms. Johnson, the Secretary of Health sends his regrets. He's been delayed but will join us tomorrow for your keynote," an aide informed her, bowing slightly as he delivered the message. "Please tell him I look forward to our discussion about the Rural Healthcare Initiative," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the easy confidence of someone accustomed to conversations with world leaders. Across the room, Marcus charmed a circle of venture capitalists, his tailored navy suit making him appear older than his 15 years. One silver-haired investor leaned forward, captivated by the teenager's explanation. "The neural network doesn't just predict outcomes, it identifies intervention points before symptoms manifest," Marcus explained, sketching a quick diagram on a cocktail napkin. "Traditional algorithms look for what's already wrong. Ours prevents problems from developing." "Remarkable," murmured the investor. "And you developed this at 14? Marcus shrugged with understated confidence. "The foundation, yes. Our development team refined the implementation." Near the entrance, Harold Whitaker adjusted his slightly frayed Armani cuff, a small but telling sign of his diminished circumstances. Though still handsome at 49, stress had carved deep lines around his eyes, and his once athletic frame had softened with middle age. He surveyed the room with the practiced eye of a predator seeking prey, or in his case, potential investors to save Whitaker Industries from imminent collapse. His gaze landed on a striking woman in red, surrounded by admirers. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar. Perhaps they'd met at a previous function. Harold watched as she navigated the crowd with graceful authority, noting how others instinctively made way for her. Clearly someone of significance. "That's Sarah Johnson," a passing waiter informed him, noticing his stare. "Chief Executive Officer of Johnson Health Innovations. They say she's about to announce a billion-dollar government contract." Harold nodded absently, the name tugging at his memory. He'd read about Johnson Health Innovations, of course. Their revolutionary telemedicine platform had disrupted the entire healthcare delivery system. But something else nagged at him. Something personal he couldn't quite place. As the evening progressed, Harold and Sarah circled the room in separate orbits, nearly intersecting several times, but never quite meeting. Once they passed close enough that Harold caught a hint of her perfume. elegant and expensive, but with an undertone that triggered a flash of déjà vu. He turned to look at her more closely, but she had already moved on to greet the mayor of Boston. "Everyone's talking about the Johnson Empire," Harold overheard a pharmaceutical executive say to his companion. "The mother is brilliant, but the son, that kid is changing medicine as we know it." Harold's ears perked up. "The son?" "Marcus Johnson. 15 years old and already has patents worth billions. Mathematical genius who developed their predictive algorithm." The morning dawned clear and bright over Manhattan. In the presidential suite, Sarah reviewed her presentation one final time while Marcus fine-tuned his demonstration, synchronizing the visual elements to match his talking points perfectly. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, watching her son work with his characteristic focus. "Not really," Marcus replied without looking up. "It's just math and code, Mom. Variables always behave as they should, unlike people." Backstage at the grand ballroom, now transformed into an auditorium with seating for 5,000, Sarah adjusted her pearl earrings. Her crimson power suit, a different shade of red from the previous evening's gown, had been tailored to perfection, projecting authority and innovation simultaneously. "You'll be amazing," Rebecca whispered, squeezing her arm encouragingly. "And now," the announcer's voice boomed through the sound system, "please welcome the visionary who has revolutionized healthcare access in America, CEO of Johnson Health Innovations, Dr. Sarah Johnson." The applause was thunderous as Sarah strode confidently to center stage, the spotlight following her progress. She began her presentation with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to directing rooms filled with powerful individuals. In the audience, Harold lifted a champagne flute to his lips, only half listening to the introduction. He'd come to scope out potential investors, not to hear another tech CEO's self-congratulatory speech. But as Sarah Johnson stepped into the spotlight, something clicked in his mind, a connection previously just out of reach. "When I founded this company 15 years ago," Sarah began, her voice resonant through the perfect acoustics, "I was told repeatedly that my vision was impossible, that someone like me, a single mother without connections or family wealth, could never disrupt an industry as entrenched as healthcare." Harold's hand froze halfway to his mouth, champagne forgotten as recognition dawned. The glass slipped from his fingers, splashing expensive champagne across his shirt front. Several nearby attendees glanced at him with irritation, but Harold barely noticed. It was her, Sarah, the nurse from South End he'd briefly dated and abandoned when she'd gotten pregnant. But this poised, powerful woman bore little resemblance to the desperate young woman who had knelt on her apartment floor, begging him to acknowledge their child. "Today, I'm proud to announce that Johnson Health Innovations has been selected by the federal government for a $1.5 billion initiative to expand healthcare access to underserved communities nationwide," Sarah continued. Her announcement met with applause. Harold's mind raced. If this was Sarah, then the son everyone mentioned, the brilliant teenager, must be. "And now I have the honor of introducing the architect behind our most recent technological breakthrough. At just 15 years old, he has revolutionized how artificial intelligence can predict medical conditions and save lives. My son, Marcus Johnson." As the teenager bounded onto the stage, Harold felt the air leave his lungs in a painful rush. The boy was his mirror image at that age. The same piercing blue eyes, the same facial structure, even the same confident posture. There was no mistaking it. This was his son. Throughout Marcus's technically brilliant demonstration, Harold remained frozen in his seat. The teenager spoke with the eloquence and confidence of a seasoned professional, explaining complex programming concepts with remarkable clarity. The audience erupted in enthusiastic applause when the young man concluded his presentation with a live demonstration of the algorithm identifying potential health risks in anonymized patient data. While the crowd rose for a standing ovation, Harold Whitaker remained seated, champagne soaking into his shirt, face ashen with shock. The boy whose existence he'd dismissed with $300 tossed onto a table had grown into a prodigy whose innovations were now worth billions, and neither mother nor son bore his name. Harold stood frozen in place, the champagne stains spreading across his custom shirt like a dark tide as the crowd continued its standing ovation. The teenage boy, his son, was exiting the stage now, walking with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Harold's throat constricted as he watched Sarah embrace Marcus, their matching smiles radiant under the stage lights. After the presentations concluded, the grand ballroom transformed back into a reception space. Harold found himself moving as if in a trance, weaving through clusters of executives and investors until he spotted them. Sarah and Marcus stood in conversation with the health secretary, her crimson suit a beacon in the sea of navy and charcoal gray. Harold took a deep breath, straightened his damp shirt, and approached. His heart hammered against his ribs with each step. "Sarah, is it really you?" he said, his voice betraying his shock as he reached their small circle. Sarah turned slowly, her expression transforming from warm engagement to perfect professional composure. If she was surprised, nothing in her demeanor revealed it. Harold Whitaker. What a surprise. The health secretary, sensing tension, politely excused himself. Marcus observed Harold with analytical curiosity, his blue eyes, Harold's eyes, taking in every detail of the man who had disrupted their conversation. "You look incredible," Harold continued, struggling to reconcile this poised, successful woman with the desperate nurse he'd abandoned. "You've really made something of yourself." "Yes, I have," Sarah replied evenly. Her gaze flicked briefly to the champagne stain on his shirt, then back to his face, her expression revealing nothing. Harold's eyes moved to Marcus. "And this must be—" "Marcus Johnson, my son," Sarah said, emphasizing the surname with subtle precision. "Sarah, perhaps we could speak privately." Harold lowered his voice, leaning slightly closer. "About our son." The surrounding conversation seemed to fade away, though the reception continued uninterrupted around them. Sarah maintained her perfect composure, but her eyes revealed a storm of contained emotion. "It's interesting how easily you can say 'our son' now that he's created an algorithm worth billions, but you couldn't say those words when I needed just a few dollars for prenatal vitamins in South Boston," Sarah replied, her voice low but razor-sharp. Harold's face paled. "Things were complicated back then. Family pressure. I made mistakes." Marcus, watching the interaction with intense focus, made the connection with his characteristic analytical precision. "You're my biological father," he stated flatly, not a question but an assessment of fact. Harold attempted a smile, extending his hand. "Yes, I am. And I'm very proud of the man you're becoming." Marcus ignored the outstretched hand. "Interesting. You appear to be in a precarious financial situation, considering the signs of wear on your attire and the fact that Whitaker Industries has lost 43% of its market value in the past year, according to this morning's Financial Times." Harold gaped at the teenager's cold assessment, his hand slowly lowering. "Mr. Whitaker," continued Marcus with wisdom far beyond his 15 years, "my mother built an empire while you were destroying yours. Statistically speaking, I'm much more her son than yours. The genes I inherited from you are irrelevant compared to the character I inherited from her." Several nearby executives had paused their conversations, recognizing Harold and sensing that something significant was unfolding. "Our market value is 17 times greater than your declining company," Marcus continued, relentless in his analytical precision. "You abandoned my mother when she most needed support based on the mistaken premise that she was unsuitable for your world. The irony is that now you wouldn't be suitable for ours." Catherine Sullivan Whitaker, Harold's third ex-wife and heiress to Sullivan Pharmaceuticals, approached the group, intrigued by the commotion. Her designer dress and flawless makeup contrasted sharply with her obvious curiosity. "Harold, what's happening?" she asked, eyeing Sarah and Marcus with interest. "Catherine," Harold stammered, "just business." Sarah extended her hand graciously. "Sarah Johnson, CEO of Johnson Health Innovations. And this is my son, Marcus." Catherine's eyes widened as she noticed the unmistakable resemblance between Marcus and Harold. "Your son looks familiar?" she commented, connecting the dots with impressive speed. "Yes, he has his father's eyes," Sarah responded calmly. At that moment, the CEO of America's largest hospital group approached Sarah, completely ignoring Harold. "Dr. Johnson, we need to finalize the details of our partnership. We're eager to implement Marcus's technology across our 78 hospitals." The following morning, the Wall Street Journal published an article about the conference, highlighting Johnson Health Innovations' groundbreaking technology and mentioning, in a seemingly innocuous paragraph, the interesting family connection between the technology prodigy Marcus Johnson and the struggling heir to Whitaker Industries. A week later, after rejected flowers, unanswered emails, and ignored messages, Sarah finally agreed to meet Harold in the lobby of her hotel before returning to Boston. "Thank you for seeing me," Harold said, looking visibly diminished. "Sarah, I know I made the worst mistake of my life when I abandoned you and Marcus, but I want to be part of his life now." Sarah observed him with an expression not of anger but of serene indifference that seemed to wound him more deeply. "Harold, I'll be direct. Marcus knows everything about you now, your choice to abandon us, your exact words that night. He's a brilliant teenager who makes his own decisions. If he wants to know you, I won't interfere." "What about us?" Harold asked hesitantly. "Could we try again?" Sarah laughed softly, without malice. "There is no us, Harold. There never really was. I've built a complete life, a life that has no room for someone who saw me at my most vulnerable moment and chose to destroy me." "My company is struggling," Harold finally confessed. "Perhaps we could discuss some kind of partnership." Sarah's gaze hardened. "So that's it? You abandoned me when I had no value to you, and now that I've built something valuable, you want to be part of it." "That's not what I meant," Harold protested weakly. "Marcus has a trust fund with over $200 million in his name. He doesn't need your money, your name, or your declining legacy. The only thing you could offer him is time and genuine love, but I fear you don't know the value of those things." That night, on the private jet returning to Boston, Marcus asked Sarah why she had never sought revenge against Harold. "Revenge would require me to dedicate emotional energy to him, and he never deserved that," Sarah replied, holding her son's hand. "Our story was never about proving our worth to him, but about discovering that our worth never depended on his approval." If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.